Have you thought this through?
No way will that work.
Are you sure? Is there any money in that?
You'll never make any money doing that. How are you going to pay the mortgage? Just get a job.
You're going to try and sell that? Why can't you be normal like anybody else?
All right.
Were your parents morons too?
The savvy entrepreneur to the rescue.
Congratulations. That really turned out well.
You've done a really good job.
I'm going to admit it. I'm surprised.
You know, I wish I thought of that.
I never thought anyone would bet. How did you do that?
I'm so glad you're pursuing your dreams.
I wish I had the courage to follow my dreams.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Savvy Entrepreneur Show. We're broadcasting here on WLCB 101.5, based in the greater Chicago, Milwaukee area. If you're an entrepreneur or a small business person or thinking about becoming one, this show is for you. I'm Doris Nagel, your host for the next hour. The show has two goals, really: to share helpful information and resources. I have made so many mistakes over the course of my career as an entrepreneur, and I've seen lots of mistakes that my clients and friends and colleagues have made. So if I can help just one of you out there not make some of those mistakes, then I've been successful. The second goal of the show is to inspire. I found being an entrepreneur confusing, sometimes lonely. You have no idea often if you're on the right track or not, or where to turn for good advice. So to help with that, every week I have guests on the show who are willing to share their stories and advice. And this week's guest is Brie Laughlin. She is the owner and founder of Nurse Disrupted, and she's going to share the story of her journey as an entrepreneur and how she got the idea for this company and has grown it. With that introduction, Brie, welcome to the Savvy Entrepreneur Show. Thanks for being with me today.
Thank you so much for having me, Doris.
I'm looking forward to hearing your story because it's a very interesting and timely one. Tell my listeners a little bit about your business. What is Nurse Disrupted and what does it do?
Nurse Disrupted is a health tech company focused on meeting health disparities head on. So we have an all-in-one telehealth solution that was designed for underserved communities who don't have great access to healthcare.
Who is it really for? Is it for rural communities? Is it for poor inner city communities? A mixture of both?
It really is. I mean, it's designed for the people who are left behind by technologies or access in different ways. We launched in 2020, really in response to the pandemic. And our first site was a homeless shelter in Dane County. And so the solution was first designed for a shelter that had low budget, volunteer staff, minimal resources, and really low trust with the people who really needed the healthcare at the time. It turns out that story describes a lot of places in America where people need access to healthcare and don't have great access to it. And, the solution we provide is a telehealth solution, but that is end to end and that it addresses connectivity and trust is a couple of the components that make it go in these communities that have not been effectively reached by health organizations and traditional healthcare technology.
Well, there's a lot to unpack there, and I want to dig a little deeper on some of the points you've made. But talk first a little bit about your background. What makes you tick? Why were you the right person to start this business, and why this business?
Well, I like that question. I've been a nurse for 22 years. I always call myself a tech nerd nurse. From the moment I started off in kidney and liver transplant in Seattle, Washington at University of Washington Medical Center. That was in the 90s. And I was proud to be carrying my Palm Pilot because, well, it was the 90s. But from the beginning of my nursing practice, technology always felt like it was folded in. And I could see the potential of it to elevate healthcare and practices through its use. And so, I was always incorporating technology in my practice. In Seattle, I was also a touring musician. I was an electronic musician who was working with software creatively and exploring the bounds of what technology could do in that way.
Very interesting. I did not know that. Wow, that's quite a combination. So So then talk about how you came to Wisconsin, I guess, and what led you to the idea to found this. I mean, there's a lot of things people can do who have ideas. They can try to get another group to do the idea. So talk about you and how you decided you were the right person to do this.
Well, let's start with, I know there were two parts of that question, I think.
Sorry. I have a bad habit of asking multiple questions, and people are like, well, which one do you want me to answer first? There's a lot there.
Well, I love the what brought me to Wisconsin, and then why did I start, or why am I the right person to start Nurse Disrupted? So coming to Wisconsin, my career continued to evolve. Bedside nursing, I'm so proud of that part of my career. But as it turns out, nurses are very well suited for business. You have to have emotional intelligence. You have to be able to sweep the room, make decisions, learn from your mistakes quickly and stand back up and keep moving. And so I was recruited actually by a software startup company that had nothing to do with healthcare, I think in 2008. It was called Jobster. And so it was my first adventure into the startup world. They eventually didn't make it, but I made incredible friends, and I met a mentor that was really important in my career who brought me over to Hitachi Consulting. Still not healthcare again yet, but working with Microsoft, for instance, and T-Mobile on large organizational strategies and change management projects. So now we're working with this human component of change and big operational strategies. And so each of these stepping stones, a bedside nurse with technology, bending technology to do the things that I want it to do, the startup software world, then the consulting world with these big organizations working on strategic design and changing the hearts and minds of humans so that they'll use the software in the end. So it seems sporadic, but it really is kind of laying this path that brought me then to moving to Northern California and joining Sutter Health, back to healthcare. But I joined a cardiology practice that really did not want to adopt their EHR called Epic. Well, I'd got all this change management work, really believed in the smart design and utilization of software, being able to elevate our practice and pretty experienced in working with surgeons and cardiologists who maybe don't want to change. And so I started with that work, and that was successful. And I enjoyed it a lot. I felt like it was exactly the right space with my clinical background, and I was still seeing patients at the time, but also the whole software piece and adoption and workflow design were all falling into place at that time. And I thought, boy, I should reach out to that company. And I did, and I shortly got a phone call from a man named Berntan, who was one of Judy Faulkner's staffers. So we all, Wisconsinites know Judy Faulkner is the CEO of Epic, the software company, not the Fortnite gaming company. So that was in 2012, and I was recruited to join the clinical informatics team at Epic. So a little bit different than the traditional hiring structure. I was a nurse executive hire. I worked with the sales team, but I also did product management. And so here's another stone that fell into place where I was managing products and working with healthcare organization strategy in the best use of these products, also working with the development teams on the design to solve problems and meet the health organizations.
Yeah. I begin to see why you're a natural entrepreneur. You can't stay down on the farm, Brie, I say that's a funny Midwestern expression, but you're the kind of person who just wants to keep growing and pushing the boundaries and looking at things from different perspectives. And I think that's what makes a lot of successful entrepreneurs.
Oh, I'm glad you say that. Yeah, I'm not a toe dipper. I kind of jump in, and I like it. I've enjoyed this journey. So then it brings us to the part of the story, the second part of the question that you asked, which is, why am I the right person to start and to lead Nurse Disrupted? And so that part of the story comes into play March 23rd of 2020 in working with a homeless shelter in Dane County. Now, I was just pitching in with my daughter. Our spring break had been canceled because of the pandemic, going back to Seattle. We have pitched in for people who are experiencing homelessness for years together. We met Carla Tennis, who is this incredible leader who is executive director of Porchlight, we found out that there was a gap in the healthcare resources that they had really to meet the pandemic and to protect people who are seeking shelter at Porchlight. And in looking at what they had, the state had provisioned a trailer. They had a great volunteer staff, but they weren't a clinical staff, and a shoestring budget. And I was like, well, I know how to help here. I can create a telehealth solution. And with my background, I knew a few things. I knew it just had to work. There wasn't time for training. It was a rotating staff. People are wearing so many hats and doing just so many things to make it work under those circumstances. And I'm like, it just has to be simple and ready to go. In the same breath, I had an elected position on the Wisconsin Nurses Association. We had a COVID-19 response meeting that March 23rd. And one of the other members was an associate dean of Marian University School of Nursing. And she was facing her nurse practitioner students not graduating because as a clinician, you need to have what's called practicum hours. So hours where you're engaging with patients to graduate. And here we are needing nurses so badly,
Right.
but the in-person sites shut down. One nurse practitioner student, I think she was 9 hours away from graduating. And Kim said, well, can you do something about that? And so this is where it came together then on March 25th. The original technology was donated by Epic. I was still working at Epic at the time.
Wow.
The nurse volunteers. Cool. Yeah. The nurse volunteers were friends and family. An incredible woman, Lauren Jersnack, already was in person, a nurse, a Unity Point nurse, who's devoted to our homeless shelters. She had been there in person. She started as our telehealth nurse, as well as my godmother, who was in Bend, Oregon, who came out of retirement from nursing to start. And then we had the Marian University students who then continued to be the original clinicians. We've since helped 6 schools of nursing in Wisconsin graduate over 300 nurses through the telehealth program at homeless shelters. We've expanded from Porchlight to the Salvation Army Women's Emergency Shelter and the Salvation Army Family Shelter, and made 36,000 connections there, saving Dane County almost $2 million in avoidable ED visits.
Wow. Good for you. That is incredible. Well, so what kind of telehealth services are provided? How do you match the need of what these communities in need actually need with providers who can provide it? Well, again, I'm asking a multiple question, so shame on me. My brain is just bouncing all over the place. First, what kind of telehealth services do you provide? Some people think, mental health counseling, a lot of telehealth, but it's probably more than that, or it could be.
Well, we're not a staffing company. So in our origin story, we were the ones who are training the student nurses. I bounced up a quick documentation system, a scheduling system, just created everything really quickly. And then, we have done the management of the nursing students. Now that is retiring. That part of our company is retiring in May. And the part of Nurse Disrupted that emerged where we filled the greatest need was being that conduit in the community. And what we're doing is a brand new style of telehealth. And it's a community-based style of telehealth where we provide the setup, the hardware, the software. We designed a provider-facing application as well as community-facing application, and we do the technical services. So the units actually arrived fully configured and ready to go for our customer sites. All of the training is done, and the feeding and the nurturing of the system. We also do a lot of training and work we're talking now to healthcare organizations, and we're fitting into their population health strategy. So for non-clinical people, population health is a type of healthcare strategy and design that looks at communities or subsections of patients, and you see them as a whole. And you work to address, disparities or need on this more community, 5,000 foot level view lens.
Gotcha.
I hope I explain that well. So let me answer the simplest thing first. What we do today is, and if you go to our website, you see this animation of an airdrop of a telehealth solution going into a community center. What I learned from homeless shelters, well, really back, on to the beginning of my career, is that the adoption of a technology, like the difference between a technology winding up in a drawer and being beloved and embraced by whoever it is that needs to use it, is that the value of the technology outweighs the barrier to use it. And when
that makes sense.
Yeah. Okay. In a community location, barriers are high. You have people who have low tech literacy rates. The hours that they're able to engage in healthcare, this isn't 9 to 5. They get off their hourly job at 6:30 p.m. without the opportunity to take a long lunch break to go see a physician. There's not a broadband connection. I mean, these are folks that really, and also don't have a lot of reason to trust technology, healthcare technology.
Right. And a lot of them may not have much in the way of health insurance, if anything. So every time they go see a doctor, it costs them a lot of money that they may or may not have.
Yeah, copays are tough, but as difficult as the total expense is the accessibility. So even if you do have Medicaid and technically you have a primary care provider, if you can't go in during office hours, you wind up at the door of the emergency department. That is your access. It's your 24/7 access. That is the least optimal, but the most available to people who really need help.
Right.
And so what we're talking about, what we're doing is 24/7 access. Now we have established a partnership with Conduit Health Partners. And this is a company that's a subsidiary of a large health system called Bon Secours Mercy Health. And they do nurse triage, which I love this partnership. Being a nurse and knowing that nurse triage is, typically a 15-minute engagement. It can cover 700 care concerns that any patient might have. 63% of the time that someone would go to an emergency department can actually be handled by a nurse applying the evidence-based protocols that are nurse triage. The style of telehealth is that the kiosk is not in a clinic room behind a closed door with an appointment, that people approach the kiosk and tap. I've told this joke a million times, but the original design that I souped up for March 25th had 4 buttons. And boy, did I think I was clever. But I'm telling you, it was 3 buttons too many. The interface that was accepted and usable and is true for the community side today is a one-touch interface. Makes it simple for people to engage with the kiosk. The kiosk is de-identified. So there is no login. Someone can have a truly anonymous interaction with a healthcare provider. No information from your phone passing through. If people don't feel comfortable identifying themselves, that's perfectly fine. If they do, our Conduit nurses do have Epic and an integrated record. So, people can come with their care concerns after hours. When we started off with COVID-19 screening, I was one of the nurses, and we had to be very specific in our scope of practice where it was only COVID-19 response. And it was so hard. I've got to tell you, at the family shelter, when we have a new mama who had something like a baby roll off the bed, and she just wanted to know that it was okay, that she didn't need to go to the emergency department. Those are the types of things now with the expanded nursing services that we can help, families and patients with 24/7. So it doesn't have to be nurse triage services. With healthcare organizations, they provide the care providers, or they can use our partner, Conduit Health Partners. And that's where we're expanding now, from COVID-19 response to expanded nurse triage services, and then also the opportunity with health systems for them to get their specialty providers into community locations. So we have homeless shelters. There's a specialized community center in Milwaukee. Milwaukee is the 5th poorest neighborhood in the U.S. They have a very progressive, forward-thinking executive director, Art Cerna. I might have gotten his title wrong, but he is the person who is at the head of the helm for City on a Hill. And he reached out to us, and we're now going live in a specialized community site in Milwaukee in 3 different locations. So again, now it's not homeless shelters. It's just a community. It's a community that has some of the worst health outcomes and the worst racial disparities in the US. And here we're expanding their access to healthcare that's not, the emergency department, the bills that come with it, and the hours of waiting. It alleviates the pressure on our health systems too. We're in a nursing shortage. Every person who comes into the ED that doesn't need to be there is putting pressure on the health systems in these difficult times. And so, now we're expanding to communities to help get care diffused from the emergency department out into the trusted community sites that people really depend on.
Originally, it sounds like you went out to these different shelters and community settings to say, look, we have a service available for you. Here's how, if you're interested, here's how we can help your population. I'm thinking, though, that at some point, and maybe you've already reached the tipping point, some of these organizations are going to be reaching out to you.
Yeah, I agree that we're getting there. And we're getting a lot of excitement at the promise of this style of telehealth. And so now the next page of this story is the conversations that we're having with health systems, right? That we continue to work with homeless shelters. We're having conversations now with systems across the US. Like you said, the phone calls are coming in instead of, the first shelters we expanded to, the Dane County community was coming together. We were having meetings with the Department of Health. And so, the two other Dane County shelters, the Salvation Army shelters, they went live within the month because we were all working together.
Right.
On how we could help alleviate pressure on our emergency departments. Also, there's a hotel respite program for people who don't have homes to quarantine. And how are we going to make sure that wasn't overutilized? So the Dane County expansion was, a natural step because we were all working closely together. But now people are learning about us. The press has been great. Being on your show is fantastic. We've also had news outlets like U.S. News and World Report, feature us, and Johnson & Johnson celebrate us as well and to let the world know. But the next step is helping health organizations accept this new model of telehealth, this more self-service, community-based access to healthcare. And people are getting excited about it. We're also
I'm sure they are. I mean, it's, the potential is so great. I'm sitting here thinking, though, I could see a point at which if the growth of the company isn't managed carefully, you could be inundated at some point because the need is so great,
The need is great and the economics are great. And I think there's two things. I want to talk about the growth point that you brought up. But first, I do a lot of educating. And for the other entrepreneurs, when I was looking we closed our seed round in December. And one of the challenges that I had in talking to people about our origin story is that as soon as I say homeless shelter, a lot of people shut down. They're like, there's no money in homeless shelters. They already don't have the money by definition.
Right. Absolutely. But this is a nonprofit, right? They probably think this just should be a nonprofit.
Right. Exactly. And Nurse Disrupted is for profit. But the economics for health systems work out. So the health systems are putting huge dollars between their population health strategy. They are devoted to addressing health disparities. And we are that part of the population health strategy that's proven.
Like their arms and legs of a way to actually access it and deliver something that's valuable.
Right. But we have to help people understand that there's a reason why 50% of their patients haven't been able to log on to their mHealth app. It's more of the same thing is not going to create change. Yeah. And so we're really, we're expert in these communities and we're working with health systems to pivot to the new model of telehealth. We talk a lot about privacy and regulation, truly what the HIPAA rule does and does not cover. And the acceptance of people in having a more, kind of common community space where they can more conveniently engage in their healthcare. People want it. And the HIPAA rule doesn't say you can't do it. Now you have to be meeting the requirements of the rule, but this style of telehealth is absolutely wanted well adopted with our communities and can be compliant with those, regulations. Now, growth, we have a fantastic lead investor in Mark Bakken. So he is principal of HealthX Ventures. We're not a HealthX company, but Mark has been so generous with his time and expertise. We are fully Wisconsin funded, and of our groups, there's also WIP, and we have a mentor from WIP.
Tell people what WIP is. Not everybody will know.
Partners. Yeah, it's a group of investors, right, that come together as a follow-on investor in different companies. So
Wisconsin-based companies specifically, I think, right?
Yeah, correct. Yep. And so we're proud to be fully Wisconsin funded. So what WIP also did is Bob Wood is well known in the Wisconsin investment community, very experienced, and has been a mentor for me and for Nurse Disrupted as well. And so having people who know what it takes, that are in your court, that are helping you push things forward, that includes scalability, connecting you to the people who can help you make it. Mark and Bob have been absolutely crucial in helping me and the company navigate these steps as such an early company.
Wow. That's amazing. You've got a lot of different customers, it strikes me, from your business model. You've got your ultimate people who need healthcare system, they're kind of customers. You've got homeless shelters that are kind of your customers too. And you've got these health systems who are your customers, and you may have more.
Yeah, that's right. And people do ask a lot, who is it that you're selling to? And it does come in the form of, originally the shelters had emergency healthcare grant funds that allowed them to invest in health services. Now, we have since launched a crowdfunding arm for our shelters. And so if you go to our website, nursedisrupted.com, you see where you can donate a telehealth visitor to one of the shelters, or City on a Hill, the specialized community center. We'll continue to try and spread the word on the crowdfunding piece. But the shelters themselves are customers. Systems, working with them on getting into those neighborhoods that they have not made great inroads into. Those are the conversations that we're having. An adjacent conversation with the health systems is using telehealth as a nurse retention strategy. So
talk about that. That's interesting because obviously, we've read a lot in the news, all of us, I think, about the tremendous nursing shortage, not just in Wisconsin, but almost everywhere.
Yeah. What's amazing is that the telehealth companies like Conduit, they have more applicants than they have physicians. It's very attractive for nurses. The acute care floors, we're very proud, but sometimes I describe an example of a shift that I had when I was in kidney and liver transplant. I'm so proud of the work that I was doing, but you can imagine you have 4 patients that are post-surgical. At times you have people who are even, bariatric patients. And so you can't see me. I'm 5'4", 140 pounds. And I would have patients that would be 300 pounds, and you don't have someone to help you, but you need to help them. You need to turn them, clean them, get their IVs set. So nursing is this incredible combination when you're in an acute care setting of science, pharmacology, psychology, and physical
bodybuilding
and physical labor, right? A lot of nurses wind up injured. And I remember this one night when I was working with a family, and gosh, I had been working with them for a long time. When we say you're working with the family, you have the patient that you've been caring for, but also their spouse and their kids. And I had this patient go critically wrong and was transferred to the ICU and didn't make it. And his family was beside themselves, and I cared for this person. You're allowed to care for people as a nurse.
Yep. Yeah.
But I had 3 more patients who needed me. So it's not that as a nurse, you get the moment to like, hey, I need a moment, I need a break, I need the time. You have 3 more people who need you just as badly.
Right.
And so it's physical and emotional. You can be proud, and it's an incredible profession.
Yep.
And what I'm proposing is that for your rock star nurses, offer them. So most health organizations know this at the same time. Most, if not all, healthcare organizations have nurse call unit. And if you could see me, I'd be holding up air quotes because it is a nurse call center. Now, nurses are applying to be part of these call centers in droves, but they're burning out from the acute care setting. We need to keep our nurses inspired in the acute care setting. And so what I've been telling healthcare organizations is give your top performers 2 telehealth shifts in your call unit. You've got this model where you have to have the call units. We're talking about expanding it, putting the care stations. I've been talking a lot about community centers. I'm working with health organizations and putting the care stations right outside the emergency department and using their nurse triage arm to engage or at least have an opportunity for the patients to engage that aren't truly emergent to get nurse triage. And that's provided by the telehealth unit or the nurse right now, the call center that's part of a hospital that's manned by nurses. And so there's been surveys that have been published recently that if a nurse was offered a telehealth shift, that would be something that would keep them in the profession. So you don't have to say you can either be in acute care or in this call center unit. All of them are part of the organizational structure of a health organization, but say you can have two shifts to give your body a rest, to just
to know you're helping, but help in a different way.
Right.
With different stressors, which, it's kind of like, an exercise regimen. If you're training hard for marathons every day, your body breaks down. But if you mix the training up, you end up stronger and can hang on longer and have better endurance and better mindset, less injuries,
Yeah, agreed. And then I think you were touching on this. The nurses, for instance, from Conduit have expressed the way that it makes them feel to know that they are going to be working with people at shelters. It's gratifying. Not that being on the floors isn't gratifying, but sometimes you're just at that point. But the opportunity to work with the community and, we don't join nursing. I got to say, the nursing profession is great, but it doesn't have the promise of the big paycheck or a lot of prestige. I talk about, I was a biology major. I was very competitive. University of Washington School of Nursing was the #1 school of nursing in the US at the time. I got in there. I also loved computer science. I chose between the two. I chose nursing, and I did it because I wanted to work with human beings directly and feel like I was making a direct impact on people. And that's where a lot of nurses come from, not all, but that being able to have a physical respite and also that gratifying breath at the same time to just, re-inspire us as to why we got into nursing in the first place. And so I think that people are excited about this nurse retention strategy, as well as the community expansion of telehealth with nurse triage protocols.
Well, Brie, you've got to have a couple of stories or two, maybe on a no-name basis, of how your service, we've kind of talked about this at a theoretical level, but you're touching lots of real people every day. Share a story or two about how your service has made a difference with people on the ground, any one of your customer groups.
Yeah, I think when I think of the early days and we started incorporating a lot of compassion training with technology, which is part of our system today. When we have this airdrop system, part of our training too with our providers is how to make it feel like a very human interaction, even though you're using telehealth technology. Mm-hmm. And, that came in each day when I was, the nurse on the other end of the telehealth unit. And the people who came up to me were frightened. I don't know how, and this is something that I couldn't have gotten on the phone. People have a lot of ideas about people who don't have homes. I've heard, especially with the hotel program, people would say, Brie, they're going to try and game the system. They're going to try and just get into the hotel instead of being in the shelter. And I'll tell you, not a single human being that got in front of me to screen was gaming the system. They were terrified to admit that something was wrong with their body. And telehealth is amazing in two ways, that I could feel and look and see the fear, but I could look into the camera, which is interesting with telehealth, right? If you and I are looking in Zoom and we're actually seeing each other, it looks like we're not looking at each other at all.
Right.
But when you look into the camera, it feels like the person on the other side is looking directly into your eyes, and you could see the trust and the connection. We did a survey, and I'm really, really proud of this. The original grant for Porchlight was through the WPP program. And we did a survey of the experience of the sheltered guests, and 96% of them felt respected and compassion. And you know, it's just the worst day, year, moment of their life.
Right.
And they had really positive responses in their experience. And I talk to people about that, but it's also part of how we train any provider who uses our app, is just, you know, that simple piece of compassion and humanity, and kind of the tricks of a few tricks with your technology. The other thing that I really love, and I wish I'd pulled up the quote, is that many of our nursing students, and we learned this with the first cohort, never had engaged with people who don't have homes in shelters. It was their very first time.
Wow.
And they wrote reflections on what it was like. You know, they also had that opportunity because it was a telehealth opportunity. They were an hour and a half away. There was a physical distance, you know, but it wasn't a space that they had thought of being in. And their experience was just compassionate. And, you know, so many people appreciated the new contact and exposure and opportunity to work with people that had a very different social and economic ecosystem than what they were in. And so to see these reflections and the provider impact was pretty awesome. So
yeah, I can only imagine. Well, so right now you are really Wisconsin based, and it's sad to say, even though Wisconsin is not among the poorest of our states in the United States, I'm sure the need is enormous, the unmet need. But where's the company headed in terms of growth? Is your focus really just on expanding in Wisconsin? I mean, your model obviously could scale probably with the right structure to be in almost any state, although I guess you've got some restrictions in terms of nurses who are licensed in one state who have to, I don't know. I'm not sure how that all works. Talk about that.
Yep. So we are in conversations from Maine to Florida. And
wow.
The design is so that the system can be maintained remotely. So for instance, the design of the system, you know, every piece was important to me, that it had to be lightweight in nature so that we could, you know, service and troubleshoot from afar. Any piece breaks, that we can overnight it because of the lightweight nature. Also the ability for, you know, the entire system to, you know, be, you know, mobile and lightweight, but it has a lot to do with technical services. If I had a heavier system, that we would need more on-site resources for servicing versus really being able to do this through shipping and right. from afar. And so, right. yeah, we are in conversations everywhere in the U.S. And then the second part of it, Doris, help me. It was a two-part question, and the other.
Well, I was just curious how the fact that I think nurses are like a lot of professions are licensed by a state, so.
Yeah, nurses are thank you for that. This is an important point. There's two models of what we do. Use your own nurses or use the Conduit Health Partner nurses that we have. Or you don't have to use nurses at all. You can use your therapist, your cardiologist, whatever specialty you're trying to get into a particular high-risk area or underserved area. Mm-hmm. We don't say you have to use nurses. It just so happens that nurse triage service is where we're expanding. And it's with our, the nurses of our health organization, or they can use the conduit nurses. Now, nursing practice and the way that we're regulated across state lines is different than prescribing provider practice, physicians, NPs, and the like.
Oh.
It's this concept of compact states. And so that's a multi-state agreement, so that if I have a license in Wisconsin, that I can practice anywhere across the compact states.
Oh boy, that makes telehealth so much easier than trying to have physician practices or a lot of. I think personally, this whole notion of state licensing for a lot of professions is gonna have to get rethought in a lot of ways. But it's good that nursing is more flexible than many.
Yeah, it helps. It's the compact states cover about half the country. And then in the other half of the country, then you have, for instance, California is a great example. You have to have a California state license. Our nursing partner is licensed in all the states. So the compact licensure helps. You get this big swath of 25 states where it's fine, and then they've had to staff to the additional locations that they provide care. So that's how we're a little bit different than prescribing providers. We can have a further reach, and also because conduit, that's what they do.
So your opportunities for growth are really tremendous. And you mentioned funding and pitching and that you found investors. What advice would you give to other entrepreneurs based on what you learned through the pitch process and finding funding for Nurse Disrupted?
Yeah, never stop. Just grit and resilience. Two things that made a difference for Nurse Disrupted was the Wisconsin Governor's Business Plan Contest. Was a fantastic contest. It gave us tremendous exposure. I think all of the investors that wound up being part of this round had heard me pitch at that particular contest. Now, it took more. It took a lot more beyond that, but that initial engagement was a big deal for us. The second thing is I found a great accelerator. It was the Health Spark Accelerator. It was out of Traverse City, Michigan. It was specifically about health tech companies in the Midwest. So, it was very focused on healthcare technologies and Midwest-based companies. And, they were fantastic putting together speakers that could help with what to expect. I know when you were talking, in the introduction of your show, how, kind of lonely and isolating it can be to start a business as an entrepreneur, and an accelerator, or at least the one that I was part of, with the speakers and the pitch coaching, the constant pitching, putting you in uncomfortable situations, giving you hard feedback. That I think that
kind of like a toned down Shark Tank. It sounds.
Yeah,
like.
yeah. And the feedback's key. I absolutely had soul crushing feedback, but I wrote it down, and really, took what I could from the feedback. Now it's not always right, but it's darn good. And it's coming from people who are expert, who've been at it. And so, some of the most soul crushing feedback was some of the best feedback. And just the consistent, I had the advice and the mentorship at the right time to keep going. There are terrifying moments. I put all of my retirement and savings into the company. I personally invested in Nurse Disrupted first. It was me putting my money there and saying, this is a care delivery model that will change the way we get into our underserved communities, and I stood by it. And I have a great daughter who's 10 years old and a fantastic husband who just have stood behind me every step of the way.
So having a great support network is really important, it sounds like. Are there other resources that you would recommend or that you found were particularly helpful? And, overall, what advice would you give to help entrepreneurs find those resources and build that network?
Yeah, there's local, out here, there's Generator, there's the Wisconsin Technology Council. I think every state has their entrepreneur community. Go find it. You don't have to be alone. There are people who have been through it, where you can, what you don't know, you need to learn fast. It's not a method. And this is the coaching that I have, and the reality that I've come by is that you don't get it all. You hardly get anything right in the beginning. But are you learning? Are you learning fast? Are you going out there and engaging with the community? And honestly, the people relationships, the importance of being hungry and meeting and connecting with people in business, people who are in the VC community, other entrepreneurs, being humble, but also really being committed to connecting. And it's so hard because you're doing everything all the time, right? And you're answering things.
There's not enough hours in the day, and there's not enough money, and there's not enough brain power. I mean, it's just, it's all about really being smart about the limited resources that you have, all the different resources.
Yeah. I think another thing is I have a great lawyer this is what he does. He actually was a dear friend of mine for years before I ever thought I'd start a company. And so I had started Nurse Disrupted, other people sit in a room, they're like, I have this idea and I want to incubate it. And then they pull the trigger. But for me, I was doing the telehealth and in homeless shelters, and then decided to leave Epic. My nice, cushy executive job, but they stood behind me. They were supportive. And I felt so strongly that this was a transformational healthcare thing that I was exactly positioned to do, that I have never looked back. Wow. The other thing is Venture Deals, Be Smarter Than Your Lawyer and Venture Capitalist. It's a book.
That's pretty hard. But depends. Some lawyers are not very good, so I guess that's not a big bar, depending on. But a lot of lawyers I know are pretty smart.
Yeah. But the Bradfeld book and Bradfeld and Jason Mendelsohn. I mean, I was like, what am I doing? Like, okay, I need to understand what a convertible note is. I need to understand what a seed round is. Like, how is it that I'm doing this so that I don't get myself backed into a corner, and that I also, as a female entrepreneur, it's I get female entrepreneurs get 2.3% of all the venture capital money.
It's ridiculous. It's insane.
And so it's like, okay, I've got to hit this, and I've got to personally understand. And that book helped me with the just fundamentals of, startup VC world, the pitfalls. And so, not to pitch the book, it'd be great if Brad and Jason knew who I was, but it helped me a ton, understand the world that I needed to get into in order to make Nurse Disrupted go.
Wow. So very cool. Well, we're almost out of time. The hour has just absolutely flown by. I've got like 5 million more questions to ask you, but sadly, the show format it's an hour, and they really won't let me go further than that. So before I let you go, I want to make sure you have a chance to let the listeners know how to reach you if they want to brainstorm or they want to be part of Nurse Disrupted, or, just want to know more and want to engage with you and your company. What's the best way for them to do that?
There's a bunch of ways. Our website, nursedisrupted.com. I actually read all the stuff that comes to the contact page. There's also the donate page. Don't forget, if you want to donate a telehealth visit to a community that really needs it, please do it, nursedisrupted.com. The hardest thing of getting hold of me is knowing how to spell my name. It sounds like the cheese, but it's only 3 letters, BRE at nursedisrupted.com. And that's my email address. You can find me on LinkedIn. Very easy to get a hold of. And I welcome it. I have just valued my connections, and those are the easiest ways to directly get a hold of me.
Well, thank you so much for your time today. It's just been so inspiring, honestly, to listen to how you've taken the pieces of your life and pulled them together in a way that is making a truly a tangible difference. So it's really been a pleasure and an honor to have you on the show today.
Doris, thank you so much for what you do. Thank you for having me, and thank you so much for letting the world know about Nurse Disrupted.
It's my pleasure, and it's an honor. So thank you to all my listeners. I'm glad you're out there. It's the reason I do this. You can find more helpful information and resources for small businesses and entrepreneurs on my consulting website, which is globalocityservicesplural.com. And I have a new radio website dedicated to the show itself called thesavvyentrepreneur.org. And you will find on both sites, increasingly on my new radio show site, things like blogs, tools, podcasts, and other free resources for entrepreneurs. And I'll be populating that as the weeks go by. My door is always open for comments and questions, suggestions, just to shoot the breeze. Email me at dnagel, Nagel, at thesavvyentrepreneur.org. You'll always get a response back from me. Now, be sure to join me again next Saturday at 11 a.m. Central, noon Eastern. But until then, I'm Doris Nagel, wishing you happy entrepreneuring.